Well, we found out overnight that Tony Blair is now involved in advising the US president. Sorry, I've got Philip Ingram here with his head in his hands in the studio as a former senior military intelligence officer. Tony Blair is advising both Steve Witkoff and Donald Trump on the future of Gaza. He was, of course, the former Middle East envoy for the Western powers. Do you think that will help or hinder any chance of coming to any end to this war and indeed the future of Gaza?
I wish Sir Tony Blair the best of luck, because it's going to be a momentous challenge to rebuild Gaza after this war and make sure that terrorist groups cannot rebuild it as a launchpad for future attacks against Israel. You know, the reconstruction of Gaza will mean the reconstruction of Hamas unless Hamas is removed from power. You just can't rebuild Gaza if Hamas is still there, because then it will rebuild its network of military tunnels under everything to prepare for the next October 7th massacre. So the elephant in the room is, how do you get Hamas to relinquish power? How do you get Hamas to lay down its arms? Because until Hamas agrees to end the war that it started on October 7th, 2023, there's nothing to rebuild, or you'll just be rebuilding its launchpad for the next war against Israel.
And this is one of the really big debates going on at the moment. And I found it extraordinary that a lot of people are talking about what happens the day after. Well, we need to get to the day of the war ending first. Lots of pressure on Benjamin Netanyahu. We understand even from within leadership of the IDF, within his own government, and certainly we've seen some mass marches on the streets of Israel in recent weeks saying, and particularly hostage families, and again, they're coming from a very specific perspective. This, we need to end the war. We need to get all the hostages back. His argument has been very clear, which is you only get the hostages back when you actually are posing that threat to Hamas. But also, we're just going to have another October the 7th from Hamas if we don't destroy them completely. Where do you sit on that side, on that debate?
You know, Julia, I spent the weekend watching Hostage on Netflix, and I thought it was extraordinary to have a British Prime Minister, no spoilers, but explaining that she wouldn't allow her country to be held to ransom and refusing to negotiate with terrorists. That is the admirable position in the Netflix show. But in Israel, we're in the position where we have to negotiate with terrorists.
Well, you paid ransoms. You've paid ransoms to terrorists.
And exactly, and paying a ransom. And the debate in Israel is, can we accept an end of the war on the terms that Hamas is demanding? Now, the painful debate now is, do we take a partial deal that lets some of the hostages out and pauses the war? Or do we use our military advantage to push for an end of the war that forces Hamas to release all of the hostages and to step down from power? So the position Netanyahu is taking is, we shouldn't take a partial deal that pauses the war. We should use the threat of conquering Gaza City to force Hamas to lay down its arms, relinquish power, and free all of the hostages, because I think there's an understanding, and everyone in Israel understands that, we're all on the same side here, that if you reward terrorists for taking hostages, you're going to encourage more acts of hostage taking.
That's why they took hostages. That's deliberately why they did it, because they know that they can get a few hundred Palestinian prisoners out every single time, including, by the way, last time round, a few years back, Yahya Sinwar, who has been convicted in an Israeli jail and was freed and was able to come out. But here's the thing: I can understand if I were the family member or close friend of a hostage currently being held, one of the 20 we believe is still alive, or obviously people want to get the bodies back of those they believe to be dead, just to make sure as they're not being desecrated, but also to be sure that they aren't still alive in the tunnels, emaciated, tortured, as we've seen some horrific videos lately. I would have one view, but I also understand why Benjamin Netanyahu, a man for whom I hold no candle as on his politics, understands why he holds the other view, that actually you can't just think about those 20 hostages, you have to think about the population of Israel and the threat posed to them in the future. Is the answer, though, flattening Gaza City? Because the reason why Gaza City has not been flattened and actually is still, a functioning city is because, the Hamas terrorists were forced to flee, and because, further south, and because the IDF forces went house to house but didn't bomb on the same extent they have done other cities, because they believe that so many of the hostages are held there. That is such a difficult dilemma for any political leader.
By the way, we've seen massive protests in Israel calling on the government to end the war and bring back the hostages. And I think they're inspiring scenes and show how much Israelis care for each other and for their citizens who are trapped in the dungeons of Hamas.
More than Hamas cares for its own citizens, yeah.
Exactly, but I think from outside it looks like there's a bigger argument in Israel than there actually is. Everyone in Israel understands that we're going to have to defeat Hamas sooner or later. The question is whether it's sooner or later.
Yeah.
Do you take a deal now to get as many hostages as you can and then defeat Hamas later? Or do you say we have to defeat Hamas now because that is more urgent? And the reason we're talking about a military operation to take Gaza City is that that is Hamas's main stronghold. It's where Hamas has built tunnels underneath literally everything inside Gaza. Not to protect civilians, it's using the civilians above ground to protect its military infrastructure underground.
Yeah, and they choose so not to let those...
You know, how do we...
sorry, apologies. I was going to say they choose not to let those civilians into the tunnels where they would be safe. What do you make, though, of, you know, we've got British...
Julia, this is the crazy thing. Gaza has the world's biggest network of underground bomb shelters. Those 500 kilometers of tunnels are the biggest network of bomb shelters in the world, but Gaza and not letting escape.
Well, indeed. What do you make, though? We've had, you know, journalists, I mean, the National Union of Journalists, which is basically a sort of communist organisation, as far as I can tell, calling on Number 10 in Britain to, you know, take action against Israel over the killing of journalists. Now, we've seen lots of, in the case, you know, this regretted, but Benjamin Netanyahu says, attack on a hospital in Gaza, where we saw 20 people, including 5 journalists, died. But a lot of the times when so-called journalists, we understand, are targeted and or killed, actually, they're not what most of us regard as journalists. They're Hamas propagandists, are they not? They're people who often celebrated even what happened on October the 7th. How concerned should you be, though, how that narrative that is in so much of the Western media is undermining Israel's, well, support for Israel internationally? Oh, have we frozen? I think I'm not.
Look, let's clear something up.
Sorry.
Israel does not target journalists as such.
Eylon, hold on one second. Eylon, my darling, we lost the signal just for one moment. Could you start that response again? Thank you. Oh, I think we've lost him again.
Let's be clear.
Have another go.
Israel does not target journalists as such. Israel attacks Hamas military targets. But in Gaza, we've seen many Hamas militants who are playing dress up as journalists. There are at least 30 cases of people wearing press vests who turned out to be members of Hamas's military wing. Yeah. There are also many people who are passed off as journalists, even though they work for Hamas regime TV. Yeah. They work for Al-Aqsa TV, which is prescribed in its own right by the United States as a terrorist group for broadcasts that encourage child suicide bombings. Now, I don't know how it works in the UK with the NUJ. To my mind, you cannot work for a proscribed terrorist organization and be a journalist.
Exactly.